Hello and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Hope everyone is doing well. Today I have 4 true ghost stories for you guys from the Haunted Canada series. If I pronounce anything wrong, I do apologize. Horror Cinema Variety, Coquitlam, British Columbia. The sound of footsteps on the second floor when you're alone in the house, an unfinished basement's locked trapdoor rattling on its hinges, a ghastly wail in the middle of the night. If you're a fan of scary movies, you're familiar with these cinematic cliches. Maybe you don't even jump when a shrieking cat leaps out of the dark corner, or when someone or something passes in front of the camera, unseen by the clueless characters on screen. But for one actor with a small role in a horror movie filmed in an abandoned mental hospital, the biggest scares happened off camera. And they weren't special effects. They were all too real. Riverview Hospital is home to a host of evil spirits that have plagued film crews working in the building for years. One of those spirits is particularly vicious. It has razor-sharp teeth, a wicked bite, and can run incredibly fast on all fours. Big dogs can be terrifying, but coming face to face with a dead dog, the horror movie actor will tell you that's much worse. To understand where the negative energy within the abandoned mental hospital comes from, we need to go back to its beginning. In 1904, the province of British Columbia had a problem. The provincial asylum for the insane in New Westminster was seriously overcrowded. With more than 300 patients, children are forced to live side by side with potentially dangerous psychiatric patients. Reports started to surface in inadequate care, terrible hygiene, and horrendous living conditions. A new, bigger building was needed, and it was needed right away. The province purchased 1,000 acres of land in 1904, and in 1913, the Hospital for the Mind, later called Riverview Hospital, opened its doors in Coquitlam. It was considered to be on the cutting edge of psychiatric hospitals, but it wasn't long before the cracks started to appear. Figuratively and literally, electric shock therapy was used in an attempt to cure patients of their insanity, as well as the highly controversial psychosurgery or lobotomy, wherein a small piece of the brain is surgically removed. By 1951, there were nearly 5,000 patients in Riverview Hospital, and serious overcrowding was once again a major concern. The problem slowly corrected itself in the medical field, shifted from favoring large mental hospitals to smaller buildings with fewer patients, and the population of Riverview gradually dwindled. In July 2012, it closed its doors for good. Over the years, the foreboding grandeur and general creepiness of the old buildings have made Riverview a beacon for film production companies. Many horror movies and television shows have been filmed in Riverview's dusty halls, making it the most filmed location in Canada. But with such a powerful and long history of grief and pain etched into the hospital's walls, the scariest events sometimes happened after the camera stopped rolling. Film crews working through the night have reported seeing former patients and staff suddenly appear and disappear. People have been shoved by unseen forces. The tunnels in the basement are said to be so full of negative energy that it's nearly impossible to enter them. In 2004, an actor named Kaz, quite possibly bored and most certainly brave, spent his nights exploring Riverview when he wasn't needed on set. The horror movie was being filmed in the West Lawn building, which had been closed for more than 20 years. In the infamous basement tunnels, he felt like he was being watched and sensed a bad presence. However, it was the 4th floor that turned Kaz into a firm believer in ghosts. It was after midnight. Kaz stood alone at the end of the hallway that ran the length of the building. It was pitch black other than the dim red light from an exit sign. He waited, rooted to the ground, because he sensed something. Suddenly a dog charged at him from the far end of the hall. It was impossibly fast. and as it neared him, Kaz noticed the beast was transparent. It lunged at him, but just before his teeth tore into his legs, the dog disappeared. Kaz didn't believe his own eyes as he returned 2 more nights to see what would happen. Each night the phantom dog charged him, and each night it disappeared moments before knocking him down. Perhaps the phantom dog is charged with protecting the Ladybug Room, the 4th floor room where the majority of Riverview's paranormal activity takes place. The room received its unusual nickname in part because of the unexplained red dots, believed to be spirits, that often appear near the room in photographs. The Ladybug Room is odd, to say the least. Its door is the only one on the 4th floor that's locked. It's also the only door without a doorknob, making it impossible to enter. Finally, it's the only room in an otherwise uninhabited and powerless building that light streaming through the cracks beneath the door. What's inside the Ladybug Room? No one really knows. But it's rumored that an evil presence known as the Candy Lady dwells within. One thing known is that the 4th floor was at one time where the lobotomies were performed. Kaz couldn't resist the morbid desire to see what was in the Ladybug Room. He returned one night and peered in through the keyhole. He pressed his ear against the door. He slowed his breathing and strained to hear anything. The hall became unnaturally quiet, and then he heard it. The sound from within the locked room in the abandoned mental hospital that sent him running as fast as his legs could carry him. The sound of someone breathing. Horror movies don't hold a candle to the real-life horrors found at the end of darkened hallways, in musty tunnels, and behind locked doors. Rotting in a cage, Lévis, Quebec. There is scarcely any woman in all of Canadian history who has a worse reputation than Marie Josephette Corriveau. So reads the opening sentence of Corriveau's entry in the Dictionary of Canadian Biography. In life, Marie Josephette Corriveau was a beautiful woman, but in death she became something vile and heinous, a sickening reminder to people of the Lévis to obey the letter of the law. Born in Saint-Vallier, Quebec in 1733, she married her first husband, a farmer named Charles Bouchard, at the young age of 16. They had 3 children and remained together for 11 years despite whispered rumors that theirs was not a happy, peaceful union. The townsfolk believed that Charles was mean and abusive to his young wife. Marie Josephette was miserable, and many thought she might be better off on her own. Nevertheless, no one suspected the woman of any wrongdoing when Charles was found dead in 1760, nor did it seem strange that Marie Josephette should remarry a mere 15 months later. The times were tough, and she had to put the well-being of her children first, assuring they'd have a roof over their heads and food to eat. She married another farmer, Louis Etienne Dodier. All seemed well at first, but it wasn't long before cracks began to appear in their relationship, and it would soon come to a deadly end. A mere year and a half after the wedding, Louis was found dead in his own stable. Marie Josephette argued that their horse must have kicked and trampled her new husband. His head was caved in and his face covered in lacerations. But the locals were no longer so trusting of the young woman. An inquiry was launched by the British military authorities who had recently conquered New France. It was quickly ruled that the horse played no part in Louis's death. It was well known that Marie Josephette's father, Joseph, did not approve of his daughter's second marriage and was on bad terms with Louis. The military tribunal found him guilty of the homicide and sentenced him to hang, while Marie Josephette was found to be an accomplice and sentenced to 60 lashes and to be branded with the letter M on her hand. Neither punishment was carried out. On the eve of his execution, Joseph finally admitted that he had wanted to protect his daughter from the hangman's noose and therefore hadn't proclaimed his own innocence. But in reality, he had played no part in Louis's death. The guilt he confessed with a heavy heart lay entirely upon his daughter's shoulders. A second trial began, and Marie Josephette testified to striking her husband twice in the head with an axe while he slept. She then dragged his body from the house to the horse stable to make the murder look like an accident. No one knows why she decided at this time to omit the truth. Perhaps her guilty conscience was too much to bear. Perhaps, like many serial killers, she craved attention. But with the admission of guilt came new speculation about the mysterious and sudden death of her first husband. And her legend has grown over the years to falsely claim she had as many as 7 husbands, all of whom she murdered in gruesome fashions, such as poisoning, strangulation, and impalement with a pitchfork. It's even been said she boiled one of her husbands alive. The charges against Joseph Corvue were dropped, and Mary Josephette was sentenced to hang for her crimes. But that punishment alone would not be satisfactory for such an evil and treacherous person, who some were now coming to believe was a sorceress with dark powers. After hanging, her corpse was ordered to be placed in an iron cage in the shape of a human body and strung up for public display. The terrible act was carried out in 1763. Her cadaver was hung in the cage at a busy crossroads in the woods that would later become known as Le Corvue Forest. The cage, body and all, was left swaying in the wind for 38 days to serve as a warning. Her skin blackened and peeled away from her bones. Her hair fell out and animals picked at her flesh. The stench was atrocious. As her body withered away, so did the belief that Mary Josephette could no longer harm the living. The eerie sounds of grinding metal and clattering bones kept most late-night travelers from venturing near the cursed intersection. Those who weren't superstitious or easily spooked and passed the swaying cage arrived at their destination with pale faces and stories of the rotting body that had opened its eyes, lunged for them with decaying hands, and whispered their name with a guttural voice. With every passing day, the stories grew wilder and more frightening. Mary Josephette's body was finally moved to a nearby cemetery, but no one was brave enough to free it. Cage and Corvue were buried together. The townsfolk had hoped that'd be the last they'd hear of Mary Josephette, but they were dead wrong. Not long after she had been buried, an upstanding young man named Francois Dubois was traveling home to his wife. When he passed the tree where the cage used to hang, he saw an odd vision across the river. Demonic figures danced wildly around the crackling flames of a blue fire. Just as Francois turned to flee, a pair of bony, slimy hands clutched his throat from behind and held him in place. "Take me across the river, Dubois," the rotting corpse of Mary Josephette hissed in his ear. "I cannot pass the blessed waters of the St. Lawrence unless a Christian man carries me." Francois fell to the ground as he tried to free himself from Mary Josephette's supernaturally strong grasp. As he pulled at her arms, her maggot-ridden flesh ripped off her bones and wriggled in his hands. Francois finally succumbed to extreme fright and fainted in a heap on the side of the road. His wife found him there the next morning, nearly paralyzed with fear, but thankful to still be alive. Reports of the ghost of Mary Josephette rising from her grave to torment passerbys in Le Corvue Forest still creep up today. Those who remember her tale, and it's nearly impossible to forget, are wise to get off the roads, out of the woods, and into the safety of their homes long before nightfall in the city of Lévis. Red Eyes in the Night, Rocher-Percé, Saskatchewan. Some ghosts are peaceful, others are mean-spirited, but regardless of their disposition, most seem unable to do much physical harm to the living. That couldn't be further from the truth when it comes to the Rougarous that haunt the abandoned Rocher-Percé mines. According to indigenous traditional stories that date back hundreds of years, Rougarous are spirits with red eyes that cut through the dark. They are monstrously huge and can appear as a mix of man and animal, most commonly the coyote, and they guard their territory fiercely, attacking anyone who dares to venture too close. Rocher-Percé is a small village southeast of the city of Estevan. Translated from French, its name means pierced rock, which is how the indigenous people who have camped in the area for many years describe the odd geological formation. The villagers grew in the 1880s when people discovered coal, which was dug out of the ground and transported to Winnipeg. The first large-scale coal mine was established in 1891. Within a few years, there were dozens of mines in operation, and Rocher-Percé was a bustling community of miners and fortune seekers. But in the 1950s, most of the coal mining companies had left, and in 2011, a massive flood forced many of the remaining residents to abandon their homes, leaving behind a ghost town of damaged buildings and empty mines. The pierced rock also remains a massive landmark of sandstone that juts up from the ground like a giant bony hand from a grave. The wind blowing through its many holes, tunnels, and crevices creates an eerie screech that has long been revered and feared by all who hear it. Those who are brave enough to enter the tunnel have felt compelled to inscribe their names on the rock walls, including General Custer and his famed U.S. 7th Cavalry in the 1800s. Rougarou sightings have been reported by tourists and locals for as long as Rocher-Percé has existed. The only sound they make is a low, menacing growl, and if their target doesn't flee immediately, they attack. Those who are wise enough to retreat are followed by the spirits' disembodied red eyes through the woods far from the Rougarou's territory. Reports of these spirits have varied, but each description is as terrifying as the last. Courtney Christensen was once stalked by a Rougarou. It was a fat, furry creature, taller than a deer, part wolf and part bear. Jan Drummond described a Rougarou that was spotted walking on the roof of a school. It had the head and antlers of a deer and the legs of a man. Everyone swore that seeing it was a bad omen. So if the sight of a giant half-man, half-beast ghost with glowing red eyes wasn't enough to send you running, now you know that it's also a bad omen. Just in case you might have otherwise decided to stick around when a Rougarou confronts you in the woods. The Hanged Man, Bridgetown, Nova Scotia. The prettiest little town in Nova Scotia. That's the unofficial motto of Bridgetown. Population 949, which was incorporated in 1897. Victorian houses line the streets. The small town shops are huddled close together, and people greet each other warmly on every street corner. An annual triathlon in the summer and a cider festival in the fall draw happy crowds. It's quiet and peaceful, and that's exactly how the townsfolk like it. But then the townsfolk aren't the ones spending their evenings at the stem to stern bed and breakfast. They aren't the ones who have discovered Bridgetown nights can be anything but quiet and peaceful. They aren't the ones huddled under their bed sheets, listening to the hollow rat-tat-tat of bony fingers upon their windows. The Stem to Stern is a Queen Anne revival home with 2 guest rooms. Much of its period architecture has been preserved, including the stained glass, the front turret, and the original wood throughout. Bridgetown was once a vital shipbuilding town with plenty of wealth, and the beautiful homes reflect this heritage. They also have the perfect look for a movie about a haunted house, and in the case of the Stem to Stern, the perfect ghost. 1 week after purchasing the property, the owner was awoken with a start by an odd sound she assumed was caused by the wind. She slipped out of bed and went down the stairs to make sure all was well and to get a drink of water. She passed a storage room. She paused. The air drifting under the door was unnaturally cold, and then she heard a sound that chilled her to the bone. Rat-tat-tat, rat-tat-tat. It sounded like someone was tapping on the window, and it appeared to be coming from inside the storage room. She opened the door and entered the room. What she saw outside the window immediately caught her attention. There was a man hanging by his neck from a large tree swaying in the wind. She jumped in alarm, but when she looked out the window again, the dead man had disappeared. It's suspected the man had committed suicide, but no one knows who he was or what exactly happened to him. That doesn't stop the man from frightening guests from time to time. The reports are always the same. Late at night, the bedroom's temperature plummets for no apparent reason. Someone issues a warning on the window, rat-tat-tat, rat-tat-tat. But then, instead of hanging from the tree outside, the man suddenly appears in the hall or a room. His face is distorted with pain and his neck is twisted and bruised. It's a terrifying vision that forces guests to scream and shut their eyes tight. And when the guest finally finds the courage to open his or her eyes again, the hanged man is gone. If the reports from the stem to stern are to be believed, it would appear the prettiest little town in Nova Scotia harbors a secret that neither pretty nor little. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking my channel, and I will see you on the next one.